Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Hey guys, my apologies about just it's really cold and I'm putting my feet on a heater. And so I'm going to be laying like this. But yeah, who was it? Zetos? Yep. Thank you, sir. I've been wanting to learn about not just British India, but just the Dutch and the British in the Indies. Jesus, I can't talk. The East India Company, and I'm curious about how so many, the Dutch being such a small country, the Netherlands being such a small country, how they have so many little kind of like crop up colonies all around the world, and it has to been for some reason. I'm trying to learn more about that, but also British India and all that. So this is a good place to start. That was a terrible intro. I'm sorry. My name is Connor, and I'm cold. If you aren't ready to learn, there's the door. You're in the wrong class. Home ec's down the hall. My feet are so cold. Make me some hot cocoa. Yeah, let's go.
This video was made possible by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, online store, or website, make it with Squarespace. Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian.
And Discord link below the original link here. Click on it. If you don't get a role right away, don't worry, I will promote you.
Today's episode, how the British Empire was able to assert control over India.
Prime and low. Fire.
How old is this? Is this a really old one? 2018. Great channel.
The Indian subcontinent was subjugated by an island more than 20 times smaller in size. This unimaginable conquest of what would become the jewel in the British crown greatly empowered the British Empire. By the middle of the 19th century, British rule led to a new wave of South Asian nationalist movements, the effects to which are still felt to this day. But we're not going to be delving into too much detail about the consequences of British rule. Rather, our goal is to evaluate what actions taken by the British and Indians alike paved the way for British rule in the first place. In order to understand how the British were able to take control of India, we need to go back to New Year's Eve on 1600, well into the reign of Elizabeth I. It was her signature on a royal charter granted to a group of adventure merchants, later known as the East India Company, that would change the destinies of two nations forever. However, at the time, the company's leaders were not yet interested in trading directly with the reigning Indian power of the time. Instead, they focused on competing with the Dutch, French, and Portuguese in the East Indies. But over time, the East India Company, after being driven out of the East Indies, shifted its focus onto the Indian subcontinent. In 1640, a company representative succeeded in securing a grant of land
I just want
in
to say,
southern
guys,
India.
I've said this before. I always wondered why wasn't it China and Southeast Asia and India the ones to go out and conquer everything and get colonies? They just seem like they're the most fit to do it, with giant populations and established kingdoms, empires, or whatever. And just look at all of the amazing, just great land that seems like it'd be great for growing crops, and it seems like you have everything you need. But I think that's precisely why it was the Europeans and not people in Southeast Asia who ended up going around and conquering places, because Europe and United Kingdom especially is just, there's so much demand but so little supply. And over here in Asia, there's a lot of demand, but there's also a lot of supply. And so the incentive to go out and conquer Europe or Africa or the Middle East or whatnot just wasn't there. And that's my hypothesis right now. Sticking with it so far, but this is all very interesting.
But over time, the East India Company, after being driven out of the East Indies, shifted its focus onto the Indian subcontinent. In 1640, a company representative succeeded in securing a grant of land in southern India, a pivotal moment, as it marked the first time that Indian land was owned directly by the English.
1640.
It was on this land that they constructed Fort St. George. The settlement that grew around this region became the thriving city of Madras, now known as Chennai, and home to over 7 million people.
Sorry for
As
butchering
more and
Madras.
more
Will do.
company-owned forts and settlements sprang up all over the Indian subcontinent, the English
Sorry, Madras.
owned forts and settlements sprang up all over the Indian subcontinent, the English became a leading exporter of spices, which, in the words of Brian Gardner, author of the East India Company, had a considerable place in life. Men were prepared to die in search of them, and many did. No gift was more acceptable, and to be well supplied was a mark of status.
At first, it's like spices, really? That's what's driving all this? And then, if you think about it for a second, it makes a lot of sense. Think about how much more edible you can make so many different types of food with some good spices. And, yeah.
Wealth could be measured in spices. The French, Danish, and Dutch all became similarly active in Indian affairs from the 17th century onwards, with the Portuguese already established in the region. Joining me now is our good friend History with Hilbert, who will be providing us with some background information on the Mughal Empire.
As the 18th century commenced, the Europeans became increasingly involved in Indian affairs. They could afford to, because the Mughal Empire, which once ruled over not just the majority of India, but also parts of modern-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, was on the decline in the wake of very costly wars of conquest. The Mughals suffered from repeated invasions of the majority of India, but also parts of modern-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, was on the decline in the wake of very costly wars of conquest. The Mughals suffered from repeated invasions by Persians, Afghans, and other Indians. In 1739, the Mughal capital, Delhi, was sacked by the Persian ruler Nader Shah, following the decisive Battle of Kurna, and in 1748, Nader Shah's protege, the Afghan Ahmed Shah Durrani, also led his armies into Mughal territory, beginning his own invasion. Due to these factors, by the middle of the 18th century, the Mughal emperor took the role of a figurehead to many new empowered local rulers. If you'd like to check out my video that goes into more detail about the Mughals, then follow the link in the description below.
Thanks for joining us again, Hilbert. As the Mughals weakened, the Maratha kingdom in the central west of India was carving out an empire of its own. Despite never eclipsing the Mughal Empire at its height, the Maratha Empire remained as a dominant power in India for another 80 years or so. As all of this was happening, the East India Company began to overshadow its European competitors, devoting substantial profits to raising a private army in an effort to contend with the Maratha Empire and Bengal. By now, the East India Company benefited greatly from the country's imposing navy, which enabled it to ferry more and more men to India than its European competitors. As much as the company's military aided in its growth, it was the laissez-faire policy that won over many local rulers to their side, many of whom benefited financially from their dealings with the company and did not perceive their sovereignty to be at risk. Of all the Europeans who had established themselves in India, the British and French based in the south were now preeminent. But under the daring Robert Clive, the British East India Company's army was able to defeat both the Bengalese and their French allies at the Battle of Plassey during the 7 Years' War, which by the 1760s allowed them to assert control over much of the Indian subcontinent unchecked through direct territorial possession or indirect tributary arrangements. To quote Gardner once more, by the Treaty of Paris 1763, the French forts taken by the company were returned to them. Some of
Wow, so the British were really consolidating power in India and in the Americas. Like, when was the 7 Years' War? You know, all at the same time. It's amazing that they were able to have these giant projects on different sides of the world and devote a good amount of resources on each place.
them having been razed to the ground. But the French never recovered, and only 6 years later, the French East India Company collapsed, although the stations remained in the possession of France. During the British advance into the Indian heartland, it encountered staunch resistance from the Sikh Empire and other Indian states not interested in doing business with
The British seized Dutch Ceylon after Napoleon vassalized the Netherlands.
the English. The Duke Empire, and other Indian states not interested in doing business with the English.
Fully on it.
The Duke of Wellington, who would later go on to defeat Napoleon, won several victories against these states while aiding his brother Richard Wellesley, who acted as Governor General of India. Consequently, by the turn of the 19th century, the Wellesley brothers had succeeded in leaving behind them the foundations of an empire greater even that of Akbar himself.
Admiral, we have enemy ships in Sector 47.
It's a trap!
As the middle of the 19th century drew closer, an Indian national consciousness began to take form, as company rule resulted in a wider array of social and economic reforms being demanded from increasingly alienated local rulers. These sentiments culminated in the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny, which was brutally suppressed and concluded with the formal dissolution of the Mughal Empire and the transfer of power from the British East India Company to Britain itself. Power now rests.
Sorry, I just think of the Indiana Jones Temple of Doom. Oh, the British never forget the mutiny of 1857. That's how I remember that.
Concluded with the formal dissolution of the Mughal Empire and the transfer of power from the British East India Company to Britain itself.
They're starting to
Power
crack
now
down even
rested
more.
in the hands of the British Crown directly, and as the 19th century continued, India's resources and the livelihoods of its people were exploited to fuel the Industrial Revolution in Britain, leading to a series of famines which shook the Indian economy to the core and left millions of Indians dead. One thing was certain. The British Empire now had millions of new subjects under its rule in India, and imperial expansion wouldn't stop there. To conclude, the political vacuum left by the Mughal Empire in the wake of repeated invasions, the failure of other Indian states, particularly the Maratha Empire, to fill that vacuum and unify India, the failure of other European powers to stop the British, Britain's military and industrial superiority, and the governing policy of the East India Company allowed Britain to take over the Indian subcontinent. Now back to our Indians.
You could almost walk from Singapore to the tip of South Africa almost without ever leaving British territory. Obviously, you have Iran here.
Subcontinent. Now back to our sponsor. Recently, Squarespace has made my life a lot easier. This website building
Squarespace, Armchair Historian promo code. Make sure you use that. Helps them out.
Platform offers a wide array of customizable design templates to get started with. 8 new ones have been released.
Look, when the ads are in the middle or in the beginning, I'll play through them. But I know since it's at the end of the video, people are going to check out anyway. But be sure use their promo code down here if you do the Squarespace that you see here.
Also, be sure to 10% discount on your...
Yep, great video. Awesome. Getting a bit more into what I'm trying to learn about East India Company. And I'd like to learn more about the Dutch Empire and their conquests and explorations and whatnot. See you guys next time.